So let's just start out, Elder Walker. Before we begin about your life, you're a member of the first quorum of the 70, and there's a lot of people that may not know what that is, where that fits into the hierarchy, and what the members of the 70 do. Could you explain to us a little bit about that and what members of the 70 do?
Well, the first quorum of 70 are a group of general authorities who serve full-time in service to the Lord. And basically, we do whatever the quorum of the 12 wants us to do in assisting them to carry out their assignments. There are two quorums of 70 that are general authorities. The first quorum of 70 and the second quorum of 70, both are full-time assignments, and those brethren all serve as general authorities, go wherever they're assigned, serve anywhere in the world, have general leadership responsibilities, and receive assignments from the senior brethren in various areas of the world and in various headquarters assignments.
And your current assignment is the executive director of the temple department.
That's correct.
A lot of the 70 have such assignments locally with the church departments.
Yes.
And others are sent to other areas of the world to perform whatever they're assigned to do.
About half of the general authority of 70 serve at church headquarters, and about half of them serve in other parts of the world in area presidencies.
Okay. And tell us about the other quorums of the 70 and how that works. I know there's a lot of confusion about that.
There are 6 other quorums of 70. Those brethren are called area 70s, and they have the same authority, being ordained 70s, and they receive assignments also from the 12. But those other quorums of 70, the area 70s, do not serve full-time. They are like a stake president. They would live in their own home and probably go to work Monday through Friday like other people and do weekend assignments. So the distinction between the 70s are the general authority 70s, who are in the first and second quorum, and they serve full-time. The other 70s in the 3rd through 8th quorum of 70 are area 70s, and they're not really full-time in service, but they do the same kind of assignments, mostly with weekend stake conference assignments and assisting stake presidents in their assignments geographically.
Thank you. I think that will help clarify, because I know a lot of members of the church wonder about that. And you really have to study it out quite well to figure all that out.
Well, there's a lot of confusion, because for a time they had regional representatives, you'll remember, who were called regional representatives of the 12, who functioned somewhat similarly to that. Then that calling was changed, and they released all the area 70s, and for a time they called the additional 70s area authority 70s. And that the area authority and the general authority were confusing, and so the brethren decided to eliminate the term area authority 70. So they're no longer called that. They are now called area 70s.
And the magic of that is that it's almost infinitely expandable.
It is.
For however many.
And there's a scriptural mandate that you can have as many quorums of 70 as are necessary to do the work of the kingdom.
Wonderful. Thank you for that explanation. You know, we're going to talk about your growing up years. Sister Walker will talk about your growing up years here in a few minutes, but maybe to introduce this, I'd like to play a clip from your conference address where you talked about an experience that you remembered for these years.
Yes.
In the foyer of your grandparents' home. Could we play that clip?
I lived in the small prairie town of Raymond, where my grandparents lived. I could walk to their home, so I visited often. I remember frequently standing quietly alone in the foyer, reverently looking at that picture of the First Presidency. I remember thinking about why my grandparents thought it was so important to honor the First Presidency and have that picture prominently displayed in their home. All who entered would see it. Perhaps most importantly for their children and grandchildren, it was a constant reminder of what was deeply important in the hearts and lives of Grandma and Grandpa.
So there's one experience from your childhood. What else can you tell us about growing up in Raymond, and maybe some of the people that influenced you the most?
Well, thank you. The town I grew up in was a small Mormon town. It's in Canada, and some people are surprised to hear that it was essentially a Mormon town. But the small communities in southern Alberta that were settled by Latter-day Saints who moved from Utah and Idaho have still pretty much continued as Mormon towns to this day. You've got Raymond and McGrath, and Cardston is the most well-known because that's where the temple is. And so those little towns could have been plopped down in somewhere in southern Idaho or Utah, and everybody would have felt like they were in the same place. So it was quite a unique place to grow up. They're essentially farming communities. There was a strong support system of faithful Latter-day Saints. The saints in those communities are very faithful, and I grew up in a town where my grandfather was the stake president, and my dad was in the bishopric, and it was a little town, and not many ways to get in trouble. It was a pretty sheltered life, and it was good for me as a child growing up.
Did you grow up on a farm? What did your father do?
My father was the town doctor.
Oh,
so
okay.
we grew up in town. It was a farming community.
You grew up in good health then.
Well, I don't know. My dad brought home every disease from the people that he treated, so we always said the doctor's kids get all the sicknesses. But I loved growing up in that little town. It was a wonderful place to grow up.
Besides your grandparents that was mentioned in the talk excerpt that we heard, who else was influential in your life? Did you have somebody else that played a great influence on your growing up years?
Well, my first bishop that I remember was Bishop Hicken, Orvin Hicken. And back in those days when they didn't release bishops so quickly, you might have a bishop for 7 or 8 or 10 years. And actually, all of my youth, from the earliest I can remember till I went on my mission, I only had 2 bishops. So it was Bishop Hicken and Bishop Holt. And I would say those 2 men had a great influence on my life, and I loved them and admired them. And in a very real way, they were ideal bishops for me. And they nurtured not only all of the ward members, but in particular the youth. I've always felt like, as a general authority, when I visit stakes and we train the priesthood leaders and I talk to the bishops, I tell them one of the key things is you've got to take care of the youth in the ward. And my bishops did that for me. And so 2 of my heroes when I grew up were Bishop Hicken and Bishop Holt, my 2 bishops of my youth. Loved them and admired them very much.
You know, I think that a lot of people would say that their bishops that grew up in the church would say that their bishops were very influential in their lives, as a youth especially. And I think that continues to be so with the youth even today.
Well, of course, we would hope that would be the case because there's so many influences on the youth of the church. If a primary influence for them is their seminary teacher or their bishop, that's going to be a wonderful positive influence. I think for most of us, our parents and our grandparents are the greatest influence in our life.
Sure.
But outside of that family relationship, you're going to have bishops and seminary teachers that are often going to be the best influence in our lives.
He's got great aunts and uncles, and some of them are still alive at 95.
Oh, wow.
And still living in Raymond.
Oh.
So we make our every other year, whenever we can, trek up there because they're just delightful people. And his grandma was like the young woman's president for forever, and everybody loved her.
As a matter of fact, in our family, one of the interesting stories was my grandma was the stake young women's president. She absolutely loved it. She loved all the girls in the stake. And then Elder Benson, then an apostle, came and reorganized the stake and called my grandpa to be the stake president. And the first thing he did was say, "Your wife's got to be released as the stake young women's president." And she was pretty unhappy. She did not want to be released as the young women's president. But she went from young women's president to wife of the stake president. But that's a funny story in our family.